Welcome back to the deep dive. We have a file on the desk today that is, well, it's honestly equal parts terrifying and inspiring.
I think that's the perfect way to put it.
We're going back in time, mid-1800s, and the world of medicine, I mean, it just looks so different.
It really did. And we aren't just talking about a lack of, technology. It's not about not having MRI machines or robotic arms.
Yeah.
We're talking about a fundamental, catastrophic misunderstanding of what actually made people sick.
Exactly. I was reading through these sources, and this one phrase just kept jumping out at me. I mean, it was frankly keeping me up at night.
I think I know the one you mean.
It's how they described hospitals back then. They weren't called places of healing
No.
or sanctuaries. They were known colloquially as houses of death.
That is a chilling label, isn't it?
Yeah.
But as we look at the data, I mean, it was statistically accurate. That wasn't an exaggeration.
It wasn't hyperbole, and that is what we're here to unpack today. We're looking at the story of Joseph Lister, the British surgeon who looked at those houses of death and just decided that good enough was, well, that it was a moral failure.
He couldn't accept the status quo.
No. And we're going to look at how he peered into this invisible world, how he challenged the leading scientific theories of his day, which, everyone else just accepted, and essentially invented the entire idea of antiseptic surgery.
And what I love about this story, what makes it so compelling, is that it's a detective story. It really is.
It totally is.
It's about connecting these dots that nobody else saw.
Yeah.
It involves, of all things, spoiled wine, broken bones,
Sewage treatment,
and a chemical that literally burns your skin.
and a whole lot of pus. Let's just be honest with everyone listening right now. There are going to be some pretty gross moments in this deep dive.
There are, but it's important context. You can't appreciate the clean without really understanding the dirty.
That's a good way to put it. So let's start there. Let's set the scene. Mid-1800s. We have this source material describing surgery as fast but deadly. What does that actually mean for a patient?
Well, you have to think about the constraints of the time. Anesthesia was in its absolute infancy.
So like ether and chloroform.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Ether and chloroform were just starting to show up, but they were crude, they weren't refined, the dosages were all over the place. So for a very long time, speed was everything.
Right.
Surgeons were judged not on their delicacy or their precision, but on their clock speed. How fast could you get it done?
Like a pit crew in a race.
Exactly. A great surgeon, a truly famous one, could amputate a leg in under a minute. And they had to, because the patient was often barely sedated or just,
Right.
wide awake and in agony.
But here's the paradox, and this is the part the source really highlights. A patient could survive that. They could survive the trauma of the knife.
They could survive the blood loss, yeah.
The surgery could be declared a success by every standard of the day,
Technically perfect.
but they would still die.
They would still die. The real danger didn't stop when the last stitch was tied. The real danger began the moment they left that operating table and were wheeled into the ward.
The sources list these complications that were just normal. Wound infection, pus, sepsis, gangrene. I mean, it sounds like a horror movie script.
It was a horror movie for the patients.
I so.
And you used the key word there, normal.
Yeah.
In the mid-1800s, seeing a wound turn red, swell up, and discharge pus wasn't seen as a medical error. It wasn't a sign that the surgeon had messed up.
So what was it?
It was seen as an almost inevitable stage of healing, or, of dying. It was just what happened.
I saw a term in the notes that it blew my mind. Laudable pus.
Yes, laudable pus. Think about that for a second. The word laudable means praiseworthy.
They were happy to see pus. I don't get that.
They were relieved. They honestly thought that thick, creamy white pus was a good sign. They thought it meant the body was fighting and healing itself, pushing out the bad stuff.
But it wasn't.
It was a massive staphylococcal infection. They only got worried when the pus changed, when it became what they called saneous pus.
What's that?
Watery, bloody, and just foul smelling. That was the sign of gangrene setting in. But the very fact that they categorized a raging infection as praiseworthy, that just tells you how deep this misunderstanding went.
Right. I saw another term in the notes, pyemia, right alongside gangrene. Can we break that down? What is physically happening to these people?
Pyemia is effectively what we'd call sepsis or blood poisoning today.
Oh.
But the name literally means pus in the blood. It's when bacteria from the wound get into the bloodstream and they spread everywhere. They cause abscesses in the lungs, the liver, the joints. everywhere.
So the infection starts in, say, your leg, but it ends up killing your organs.
Exactly. And then you have hospital gangrene. This is where the tissue literally dies and rots while it's still attached to your body.
And it spreads.
It spreads rapidly. And once gangrene set in, the only option was usually a reamputation cutting higher up the limb. But of course, then that new wound would get infected, and the whole cycle just repeats itself.
And the stats back this up. The sources say that going into a hospital for a major wound surgery, like an amputation, was basically a coin toss.
In some of the major European hospitals, the mortality rates for amputations were 40, 50, sometimes 60%.
60%.
Imagine that. You go in with a broken leg, and you have a better than 50-50 chance of dying from the treatment.
It's staggering. And this brings us to what I think is the most frustrating part of the whole story. The surgeons of the time. And we have to remember, these weren't stupid people.
Not at all. These are the smartest medical minds in the world.
Right. They were looking at these rotting wounds, these dying patients, and they were asking, why? What is killing them?
And their answer was the air.
The air, the miasma.
Miasma.
This is the part that is so hard for us to wrap our heads around today, because we all grow up knowing about germs, but we need to get inside their heads. What was the miasma theory?
So miasma comes from a Greek word meaning pollution. The theory was that bad air or a noxious atmosphere was what caused disease.
Okay.
And to be fair to them, it was an intuitive theory. It seemed to fit the data they had at the time.
How so? I mean, what was the logic?
Well, think about where diseases always seem to crop up. Swamps, slums, overcrowded hospitals. What do all those places have in common?
They smell terrible.
They smell horrific. You've got rotting vegetation, sewage, unwashed bodies. So the logic was pretty straightforward. I smell something bad. People in this area are getting sick. Therefore, the smell, the bad air itself, must be causing the sickness.
That's the classic correlation versus causation trap.
Precisely. In a hospital ward, you had a patient with gangrene. Gangrene has a terrible, terrible smell. Then other patients nearby would get sick. So surgeons believed the miasma from the sick patient was literally floating through the air and poisoning the others.
Wow. But if you believe the air is the killer, that puts you in a really tough spot as a surgeon, doesn't it?
It creates a massive psychological barrier. And that is the real tragedy of the miasma theory. If the problem is the atmosphere, something vague, invisible, and just everywhere, then as a surgeon, you're helpless.
You can't sanitize the atmosphere of London or Glasgow.
Right. You can't scrub the wind.
Yeah.
And so it led to this sense of profound fatalism. Surgeons genuinely believed that post-operative death was just bad luck or act of God or just the price you paid for doing business in a house of death. They didn't feel responsible.
So they didn't think there was anything they could specifically do to the wound to stop it from going bad.
Exactly, because the problem was floating around the room. They didn't believe microorganisms existed, or at least they didn't believe they had anything to do with disease.
So to them, a wound rotting was just a chemical reaction.
Pretty much like iron rusting. You expose iron to the air, it rusts. You expose living flesh to the air, it rots. It was seen as inevitable.
And into this atmosphere of fatalism and rot steps Joseph Lister.
Enter Joseph Lister.
So Lister is working right in this environment. He's a British surgeon born in 1827. And the source mentions he was working with specifically high-risk cases in Glasgow.
Right. Compound fractures, amputations. He was right in the belly of the beast.
He was seeing the worst of the worst.
Yes, but here's the character trait that defines him. He didn't buy the fatalism. He refused to accept that these high mortality rates were just how it is.
That's a key distinction, isn't it? He's looking at his patients dying after he had, successfully repaired their injuries. He did his job perfectly, and it just haunted him. He needed to know why the wound went bad.
He was obsessive about it. He would look at a wound, and he would see that the inflammation, the infection, it started at the cut, and it spread inward. That didn't look like a general atmospheric poisoning to him.
It looked like something was getting in.
It looked like a local invasion.
This is where the story gets really cool, because it stops being just about medicine and starts being about cross-disciplinary thinking. Lister doesn't find his answer in a medical textbook. He doesn't find it by talking to other surgeons. He finds it in a chemistry lab.
That's right. He looks outside his own silo. He starts reading the work of a French chemist, a man named Louis Pasteur.
Now, most of us, when we hear Pasteur, we think of pasteurized milk, right? That's the immediate association.
Yes, but at this time, we're talking the early 1860s, Pasteur wasn't working on milk. He wasn't even working on human disease. He was hired by the French alcohol industry.
The alcohol industry.
Yeah. He was studying fermentation. He was trying to figure out why wine and beer sometimes went sour, why it spoiled and turned into vinegar.
Okay, so let's just pause here for a second. Because if I'm a busy surgeon in 1865 and I'm reading a paper about why beet alcohol is turning sour, I'm probably not seeing the connection to my dying patients.
Not at all.
How do you get from my wine tastes like vinegar to my patient is dying of gangrene? That seems like a massive, massive leap.
It is a massive leap, and that's the genius of Lister. He was able to synthesize two completely different worlds. So let's look at what Pasteur actually found.
Okay.
Pasteur proved that fermentation, the process of turning sugar into alcohol or alcohol into vinegar, it wasn't some random chemical reaction. It was caused by living organisms, microorganisms, germs, yeast, bacteria. And crucially, Pasteur proved that they didn't just appear out of nowhere.
This is the spontaneous generation thing, right? The idea that life just kind of poofs into existence.
Exactly. The prevailing theory before Pasteur was spontaneous generation. People thought life could just arise from non-living matter. You leave meat out, maggots just appear. You leave broth out, mold just manifests.
Like magic.
Pretty much. Pasteur proved that was completely wrong. He did these elegant experiments with swan neck flasks.
Right, I remember those from school.
He showed that if you boiled a broth to kill everything in it, and then you sealed it so no dust from the air could get in, it stayed pure forever. The microbes came from the outside. They came from contamination.
So the spoilage comes from the environment. It settles into the liquid. It's not the air itself. It's the dust in the air that's carrying these little bugs.
That is the crucial distinction.
Mm-hmm.
And now, just watch Lister connect the dots. He reads this chemical paper, and the light bulb just goes off. He thinks, okay, Pasteur says microbes from the air cause liquids to spoil. Well, what is a wound?
A wound is wet. It's biological liquid. It's blood, serum, exposed tissue.
Precisely. Lister realized that a wound is essentially an open flask of biological broth. It's a perfect, nutrient-rich medium, just like the broth or the wine in Pasteur's experiments.
So if microbes from the dust cause the wine to spoil...
And maybe, just maybe, microbes from the dust are causing the wound to spoil.
Whoa. So wound infection is just body spoilage.
That was the aha moment. He realized that the pus, the smell, the gangrene, it was essentially fermentation occurring inside the human body. It was the decomposition of living tissue caused by germs.
That is a gruesome thought, but it makes perfect logical sense.
And here's the kicker. If Pasteur was right, and these microbes came from the outside,
that meant you could stop them.
you could stop them. It wasn't bad air in some mystical sense that you couldn't control. It was physical particles, tiny living things entering the wound. And if you could block them or kill them, you could stop the rot.
That changes everything. That takes you from, I am helpless against the atmosphere, to, I have a specific enemy and I can fight it.
It brought microbiology out of the lab and into the operating theater. It shifted surgery from just a craft of cutting to a science of biological management. Lister basically said, we aren't fighting a ghost, we're fighting a bug.
Okay, so Lister has his theory. He knows there are invisible invaders. Now he needs a weapon. The source says his goal was two-pronged. Kill the microbes before they get in, and kill any that are already there.
Right. But he had a problem. Pasteur used heat to sterilize his flasks. He boiled the broth.
You can't boil a patient.
Generally frowned upon in the medical community. It tends to be counterproductive to survival. So Lister couldn't use heat. He needed a chemical solution. He needed what he called cold sterilization.
And he settles on something called carbolic acid.
Or phenol.
Carbolic acid.
Why that? Did he just grab the first bottle off the shelf,
Yeah.
or was there a reason he picked it?
Oh, there was a very specific reason. And again, it comes from him looking outside the world of surgery.
Right.
He was reading reports about public sanitation. Specifically, he read about the town of Carlisle. They were having a massive problem with their sewage treatment.
Sewage again. We are really covering all the gross bases today.
We really are. So in Carlisle, the sewage ditch smelled so bad it was making people sick. And, this is the key, it was also containing a parasite that was infecting the cattle grazing in the fields nearby.
Okay.
So they decided to treat the sewage with carbolic acid, which is a byproduct of coal tar.
And did it work?
It worked miraculously. It killed the smell instantly, which meant it stopped the decomposition and it stopped the disease in the cattle. Lister read that and thought, if this stuff can stop the rot in sewage, maybe it can stop the rot in wounds. That is incredibly logical, but also kind of terrifying. I'm going to put sewage cleaner on my patient's open leg.
It speaks to the desperation,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and also his determination. And we have to be clear, Carbolic acid is harsh stuff.
It's not like a gentle moisturizer.
Not at all. It burns. It turns the skin white and numb. If you leave it on too long, it actually causes tissue necrosis and creates this hard crust.
So this was not a pleasant experience for the patient.
No. But Lister wasn't trying to be gentle. He was trying to kill a killer. He was willing to damage a little bit of tissue at the surface if it meant saving the patient's life.
So let's visualize this. This wasn't just him washing his hands with a bar of soap. We tend to think of antiseptic as like hand sanitizer today.
Right.
What did Lister's antisepsis actually look like in practice?
It was a messy, wet, and pretty intense process. First, it involved direct application. He would take the pure or slightly diluted carbolic acid and just swab the wound directly with it. He would scrub out blood clots and debris with this burning liquid. Then, he had to figure out how to keep new germs from falling in. Remember, he thinks the air is full of dust carrying these bugs. So he developed this whole dressing system.
Okay.
He made a kind of putty out of carbolic acid mixed with linseed oil. He would plaster this over the wound,
Like spackle.
exactly like spackle, and then he would cover the whole thing with tin foil.
Tinfoil. Why
Yeah.
tinfoil?
He needed an airtight seal. He wanted to create a barrier that was totally impenetrable. If the air is full of these invisible germs, the acid-soaked dressing and the foil act as a gatekeeper. Nothing living gets past the carbolic acid.
And I remember seeing references to sprayers in the notes, something called the donkey engine.
Yes, the carbolic spray. This is the iconic, almost famous imagery of Lister. Later in his development of the technique, he became obsessed with the air immediately surrounding the incision. He thought, even in the 2 seconds the wound is open before I bandage it, germs are falling in.
So he decides to literally scrub the air.
He developed these machines. Some were hand-pumped, some were steam-powered, that would just pump out this fine yellow mist of carbolic acid into the air all around the operating table.
So the surgeons and nurses are just breathing this in.
Oh, yes. Everyone in the room. The patient, the students watching from the gallery. The mist was thick in the air. It made the floor slippery. It made your hands numb.
That sounds dangerous in itself.
It was. It caused kidney issues for some surgeons down the line because they absorbed so much of it through their skin and lungs over the years.
Talk about commitment. They were literally operating inside a toxic cloud to kill the germ.
It would all-out war against the microbe.
So he has his theory, he has his weapon, he has his system. Now he needs to prove it works. And the source highlights a very specific type of injury as his main test case. Compound fractures.
Yes.
We touched on this earlier, but why these specifically? Why not test it on something simpler, like a tumor removal?
This was a crucial and very strategic choice by Lister. A compound fracture, just to be clear, is when a bone breaks, and the sharp edge of the bone punctures right through the skin.
The bone is sticking out.
The bone is sticking out. Now, in the 1860s, a simple fracture, where the skin stays intact, usually healed just fine. The body's great at knitting bone. But a compound fracture? That was a death sentence.
Because the body's natural seal is broken.
Exactly. The skin, the body's barrier, is broken, and deep tissue and bone marrow are now exposed to the air and all the germs in it. The infection rate was astronomical.
What kind of numbers are we talking about for just that injury?
Mortality rates were often over 50 or 60%. It was so dangerous that the standard of care in most hospitals was immediate amputation.
They wouldn't even try to fix it.
They wouldn't even try to set the bone. They would just cut the leg off because they knew if they left it attached, the inevitable infection and gangrene would kill the patient anyway.
So Lister thinks, if I can save these patients, the patients who essentially have zero chance of keeping their limb or even surviving, then I've proven my theory.
It was the ultimate stress test. It was the hardest case. If carbolic acid could prevent infection in a compound fracture, it would prevent it anywhere.
So let's talk about the results. He starts using this on patients. Is there a specific case that stands out as the breakthrough?
There is. The famous case of an 11-year-old boy named James Greenlees in 1865. A horse-drawn cart had run over his leg. It was a nasty compound fracture.
Yeah.
Bone exposed, muscle crushed.
So by all standards of the day, that leg should have been amputated immediately.
Absolutely, no question. But Lister decides to try his experiment. He meticulously cleans the wound with carbolic acid. He sets the bone. He applies the soaked lint dressing and the tinfoil. And then, the waiting game.
I can only imagine the tension in that ward. Everyone just waiting, checking every day for that smell of rot.
Exactly. Usually, by day 3 or 4, the hospital gangrene would set in. The fever would spike. The pain would become unbearable. But day 4 comes. Lister peels back the tinfoil.
Uh,
No smell, no pus, no raging fever. The wound wasn't rotting, it was scabbing. There was pink, healthy tissue underneath.
that must have been, I mean, imagine being a nurse or a junior surgeon in that room. You are so used to the smell of death, and suddenly you have a patient who is just healing quietly.
It must have looked like a miracle. To them, it must have looked like actual magic.
Mm-hmm.
But it was science. The boy's leg healed perfectly. He walked out of the hospital on 2 legs.
And Lister didn't stop there, right? He kept applying it.
He applied it to case after case of compound fractures, and the results were stunning. His mortality rate for these specific deadly surgeries just plummeted.
Stunning how? Can we compare the numbers?
In his specific ward in Glasgow, the mortality from infection in these cases dropped from around 45% down to 15% in a very short period. Gangrene, which used to sweep through the ward like a plague, practically disappeared from his service.
That is the smoking gun.
It was undeniable proof. The dramatic reduction in infection proved that the miasma wasn't the issue.
Right. Because if miasma was the cause, just putting acid on the wound wouldn't have mattered. The patient was still breathing the same bad air as everyone else.
Exactly. The air in the room hadn't changed, but the outcome did. It proved that infection wasn't random or atmospheric, it was biological, and it was local. And most importantly, it was preventable.
That word preventable, that is the whole game changer, isn't it?
It is the shift from the medieval to the modern. Before Lister, you crossed your fingers and hoped God was merciful. After Lister, you followed a protocol and ensured safety.
So this brings us right to the legacy. The source calls Lister the father of antiseptic surgery.
A title he absolutely 100% deserves.
But I want to distinguish something here for everyone listening. We use the word sterile a lot today, but the notes mention a key difference between antisepsis, which is what Lister did, and asepsis, which is what came later.
Yes.
Can we clarify that? Because they sound pretty similar.
Sure. It's a subtle but really important evolution in the thinking. Antisepsis. Lister's method is about fighting the germs. The prefix antisepsis means against. Antisepsis, against infection.
Okay, so you're on the attack.
Exactly. The mindset of antisepsis is, the germs are everywhere. They are in the wound, they are on my hands, they are on the instruments. I need to constantly use chemicals to kill them. It's active warfare. You're pouring acid to kill the bugs that are already there.
And asepsis.
Asepsis is the modern standard. The prefix a means without. So without infection, the mindset shifts entirely. It's not about killing germs in the wound. It's about creating a sterile bubble where germs simply don't exist in the first place.
It's about exclusion, not warfare.
Perfectly put. It's about exclusion. This is why we have autoclaved instruments, sterile gowns, rubber gloves, masks, positive pressure air filtration in our operating rooms. We don't have to pour acid into wounds anymore because we've ensured that nothing dirty ever touches the patient to begin with.
I see. So Lister's pouring of acid was the critical bridge. He showed everyone that germs were the enemy, which then led the next generation to figure out how to just keep them out entirely.
Exactly. You don't get to modern sterile surgery without going through the messy, wet phase of antiseptic surgery. Lister paved the way. He proved the enemy existed so others could figure out how to build a fortress against it.
And the impact on surgery itself. The notes mention this expansion of surgical procedures. This is something I hadn't really thought about before.
Oh, it's huge. Think about the geography of the body. Before Lister, surgeons mostly operated on the extremities, arms and legs.
Things you could cut off if they got infected.
Exactly. You aren't going poking around in the abdomen if you can avoid it. If you open the abdomen or the chest or the skull, the infection rate was basically 100%. It was an absolute death sentence.
So surgeons just didn't do it.
They didn't do it. You had people dying of things we consider routine today: appendicitis, simple hernias, treatable tumors.
Yeah.
The surgery was far more dangerous than the disease itself.
But once you can control infection,
Suddenly, the entire human body opens up for repair. You can fix a hernia without killing the patient. You can safely remove an appendix. You can eventually repair a heart valve or remove a brain tumor. Lister didn't just make existing surgeries safer, he made entirely new, life-saving surgeries possible.
he founded the whole discipline of the modern operating theater.
He really did.
It's amazing to think that the entire concept of a clean hospital, which just seems so obvious to us that we take it for granted, had to be invented. It had to be fought for.
It did. And it had to be fought for against the established wisdom of the smartest people in the room. We probably shouldn't gloss over the fact that Lister faced a ton of resistance at first.
Oh, really? People didn't just immediately say, "Thank you, Joseph, this is brilliant."
No, not at all. The anti-Listerians were very vocal. They hated the carbolic spray, said it was cumbersome and annoying. They hated the extra work.
And the smell, probably.
the smell, the cost. And frankly, a lot of them were deeply offended by the implication that they, these esteemed gentlemen surgeons, were the ones causing the death of their patients with their dirty hands and unwashed coats.
Ego is a powerful thing.
It is. But data wins in the end. The survivors walking out of his ward were the ultimate proof.
So let's just recap this whole journey. We started in the houses of death.
Where surgeons were fast, they were skilled, and they were absolutely terrified of the recovery ward, and where the air itself was blamed for the inevitable fatalities.
We met Joseph Lister, a man who just looked at all that rot and refused to accept that death was simply part of the job description.
He looked at the work of Louis Pasteur, a chemist, not a doctor, and had that brilliant insight that spoilage in wine and infection in wounds were the exact same process, invasion by invisible microbes.
He weaponized carbolic acid sewage cleaner to create a chemical barrier against that invasion.
And he proved it worked by saving the limbs and the lives of patients with compound fractures, turning a near-certain death sentence into a recoverable injury.
And in doing so, he earned that title, Father of Antiseptic Surgery.
And forever changed the expectation of medicine from, hope for the best to ensure the safety.
There's that exam line the source mentioned. Joseph Lister used carbolic acid based on Pasteur's germ theory to prevent infection. It sounds so simple when you say it like that, but the implications are just massive.
It's the definition of a paradigm shift.
So before we wrap up, I want to touch on the listener's application section of our notes here. Why does this story matter to someone listening today who isn't a surgeon? Maybe they're an accountant or a teacher or a coder.
I think the biggest takeaway for me is about questioning norms. The miasma theory was the norm. Everyone believed it. It was intuitive. It seemed to fit the surface level data, but it was completely wrong.
Lister was willing to look at the brutal reality, his dying patients, and just say, the current explanation doesn't work, I need a better one.
Even if that better explanation made him look crazy to all of his peers. It's about intellectual courage. Are you willing to challenge the way we've always done things if the results just aren't good enough?
And he didn't look for that better explanation within his own echo chamber. That's the other big lesson for me here, this idea of cross-disciplinary thinking.
Absolutely. If Lister had only read surgical journals, he might never have solved the puzzle. He would have just read more and more articles about miasma. He found the answer in a study about wine fermentation.
That is such a good point. We get so siloed in our own specialties, don't we? We think the answer to a coding problem is more code, or the answer to a marketing problem is more marketing.
But maybe the answer is in biology, or architecture, or history. The solution to your problem might already exist in a completely different industry or field of study. You just have to be curious enough to look over the fence.
Cross-pollinate your ideas. I love that. And finally, I want to leave everyone with a thought that really stuck with me from the source material. It's this idea of invisible enemies.
This is the deep philosophical beat to end on.
It really is. Lister spent his career fighting an enemy germs that his colleagues ignored simply because they couldn't see them. They literally couldn't see the microbes, so they just assumed they didn't exist or didn't matter.
It's such a powerful metaphor for our own lives.
It makes you wonder, what are the invisible enemies or the miasmas that we accept in our lives today? What are the things causing rot or failure in our work or our society or our health that we're just blaming on bad luck or the atmosphere?
Just because we haven't found the right microscope to see the real cause yet doesn't mean it isn't there. We so often blame the environment, oh, the company culture is bad or the market is bad, when the real cause might be specific, granular, and totally fixable if only we're willing to look closely enough.
That is a fascinating question to chew on. Stop blaming the bad air and start looking for the germ.
And then find your carbolic acid.
Exactly. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the dawn of antiseptic surgery. It's been a wild ride from sewage to sterile.
It was a pleasure.
Stay curious, stay clean, and we'll see you in the next deep dive.